Good morning to everybody taking part. Thank you for attending our first virtual conference. First of all, I'd like to thank Simon and Nigel for the doing all the vaccines and getting everybody online. Thank you for those who attended our AGM earlier. Thank you for making the time properly. Basically, welcome. First of all, I'd like to make a small little start to make tribute to those who passed away during the COVID and during the last year, especially our past chairman, Roger and Keith Cass, who've done started a good organisation forward, and the legacy will live on. And for all the other prostate patients that have passed away, my condolences to the families. And looking at the figure this morning, the BBC saying that the prostate referrals dropped because of COVID. My concern is that these people will be later diagnosed with advanced cancer. And to the trustees who've been elected this morning, we've got a good year ahead. There's a lot of hard work that needs to be doing, and we're probably in support of our members. So to start off with, we are honoured to have on our panel this morning, we've got Steve Allen, who's a patient rep. He has been doing a great work for Tackle, and I won't take his time because he's going to mention it, but he was on a call the other day for a day and a half on Zoom. So if he can survive that, I think he can survive a 2-hour slot this morning. We've got Chris Booth, who's our he's the chat person who represents CHAPS for men's health and also on our advisory committee. Chris will go through the program of prostate cancer and early diagnosis. We've also honoured to have Professor Hashim Ahmed, a consultant urologist from the Imperial Health Council. And we've also got Martin Brine, who's going to talk about Roger Fulford's thing, the director of Impresa. But I'll leave that introduction to Steve to do that when we come to his part of things. So basically, my view is, I've always said that we can't do it alone. We are all volunteers. But coming together is the beginning. Keeping together is progress, and working together is success. Can I have the next slide, Simon, please? Right, thank you. There was, as you're all aware, the latest figures were there was in 2018 was that there was 49,000 men diagnosed with prostate cancer, the highest ever increase, more than 2017, 19% increase. That to me has mixed messages. One thing is either we are getting to men earlier and hoping that's the work that you and our groups are doing, supporting men with prostate cancer. I believe that you are the voice of the Tackle, and we need your help to move us forward, raising the awareness in the community. I still believe we have a difficulty getting the GPs on board. I think we need more awareness of that, and hopefully with our new person on board later this month, we will move the organisation forward. You've been supporting Tackle in its work. You've taken part of the Europa UMO Quality of Life Survey and the Tackle Lottery Survey. Next slide, Simon. What we found from the lottery survey, that 54% of the group found the groups rather medical staff. So that to me means that's where we need to go over the next year, is to find where the centres are, getting people involved. 52% of the groups have been, members of the groups have been in there for 3 years, and I can reiterate from my group that we've got people that have been there for longer than that. But as we said, there's 49,000 people diagnosed. how many do turn up our groups is a very small percentage. So I believe we can make more headways in that. And this is a bit that gives me some hope that 42% of people travel between 16 and 30 minutes. So that to me, I know we got COVID now, and with Zoom, I think Zoom will be a thing for groups to move forward. And the highest one was 63% were traveling up to 10 miles to attend. So the groups are doing well. And I know that each group does it differently. You know, there's groups that have bigger fundraising, but to me, at the end of the day, we are helping our prostate patients and their families, which is the important thing. Next slide, Simon. Thank you. As we know, we are volunteers, and my congratulations to the new trustees. But over the next year, we'll be looking for more trustees, hopefully, and I'm asking the groups now to start thinking of people that could help tackle in the future. I'm getting on, and you know, we can't carry on indefinitely. So basically what I'm saying is we need new, and I'm glad that the AGM has approved the appointments of Rajani and Julian, because I believe the trustees should build up a knowledge of people that can help us deliver our mission and statements. Another thing that I feel that we're not doing, and this is where I think we're not telling you what we are actually doing in all cases. We're giving you all this stuff, but people have been working hard to promote Tackle. Chris and I have actually been at the European Parliament raising the white paper on prostate cancer. There is a cancer plan in the European Parliament, regardless of what we think of Brexit. I think we have to keep an eye what goes in Europe, because that will help us. Some of the stuff we've been working with farmers. Steve and John are on the patient panel. That's another way of getting into finding out what's happening. We're working with PC UK, and I believe we have to work with everybody, all stakeholders. We're working with Pharma, working with PC UK, working with Orchid is another one and we've now have a memorandum with the Prostate Cancer Research Centre. And we have also been involved with on the members of the Patient Advisory Committee, the all-party parliamentary group on male cancers with Orchid. Tackle with Chris has co-hosted a discussion on screening on prostate cancer in the Churchill Room in the House of Commons. Chaps and Orchid co-hosted, and that was organised by Chris, and we had a speaker from Monique, our GM last year, and a new way of doing treatment. That event was sponsored by Lord Bernie Ribeiro and Sir Bernard Jenkins MP and Mrs. Ian Hunter. Basically, I think we are there. We are the voice of prostate patients. The other things, we've been on round tables in Brussels again for prostate cancer by the European Commission. And lastly, not on that, we are joined with other 25 charities for one voice for cancer. I believe now we are in a very delicate situation with COVID, that people have not been treated quickly enough, and I'm very concerned on that. The PR working, Siobhan has been working very hard on PR. You'll see all the stuff on our website. We've been asked to have radio shows like that. John has done some events in his part of the world, and their PR is an area where I think the groups can work with Siobhan in actually promoting on what they're doing. Next slide, please, Simon. The good news. I think the lottery funding that Roger started and we completed is very good news for us. Basically, although we have started late because of COVID, Sarah will be joining us later this month, and I will probably like to think we'll probably try a Zoom meeting, probably with the groups sometime, Simon, with Sarah to introduce herself and do that. I believe that we're going to have, we need more staff in the office, and it's something that we have to build on. As I said, we are volunteers, and we're very fortunate because our costs are very low, thanks to Simon and to Eric for keeping the accounts going, and we haven't got overheads like most organisations. As we said, we've appointed our National Support Development Manager. In the first year, the idea is that we're going to have 5 new support groups, and that should hopefully recruit 300 new members. And in the first year, then we will be trying to build on our existing groups, and I will help look forward for you to give us what you think the way we should go. Next, and finally, the evaluation and psychological support service is something that Rashani has dealt, and that's in a paper. And if you want any further information, all this will be is on our website. Thank you, Simon. Next one. Right, now this is where I would like yourselves to help us. I need the help with the trustees and with everybody to work with the members of, I put members of staff with Sarah at the moment, but hopefully we will have some additional staff if we get some fundraising to achieve the goals of the organisation, you know. And this is where I feel that I would like to know if we're doing it well. Are we missing the trick? You are the people that know how things go in. Do we have an e-news? Do we want more communications with you? I would say, you know, I would like to hear from you as the new chairman, because I know what happens locally. I don't know what happens throughout the country. What is the needs of our members? What is missing? My view is, I always say, treat the patient at the right time with the right treatment. And I still believe that we need to, and to Professor Ahmed and all his colleagues, I always say, treat the patient, not the cancer, because each patient is different, and the treatment should meet the criteria for someone who's younger and things like that. And again, we've got all, please use our social media sites, and look forward to any comments, send them in, because I believe that we can move forward and be the voice of prostate patients and make a change. And you know, thank you again. Thank you for attending. The final slide, Simon, I think. And again, thank you for your patience. And I will now hand over to Steve Allen, who is a man who's been working very hard during the last year with certain companies. I won't go into details, he will dealt with it. But Steve, thank you from the trustees, and thank you for all you've done.
So for those who don't know me, I was asked to take over the role of being a patient representative for Tackle around about 2 years ago, after the sad death of our good friend Hugh Gunn. And the main task, as I took it on, was to represent patients on a number of national bodies. Now, quite rightly, you may well ask, well, you haven't experienced all of the treatments, all of the clinical scenarios. How can you adequately voice the opinions of all the patients? Well, I do speak to a lot of men, as many of you out there will know, and I think probably I've got a good background now in everything that we do. So I just want in this very brief presentation to outline what's been happening over this past year. If you want a much fuller description, then contact me through the Tackle website or steve.allen@tackleprostate.org, and I'll send you a fuller version because that gets sent to the trustees. So national bodies in England for regulation of drugs and treatment, there are 2 national bodies. There's NICE, which covers England. Wales almost always follows NICE guidance, so does Northern Ireland, but because of devolution, Scotland's got an entirely separate body, and works in a slightly different way. So decisions in Scotland and England are made entirely independently of one another. And although we don't have a big grouping of Tackle members in Scotland, I do believe that we need to represent those as well as much as we do in England. The processes of appraisals and getting drugs looked at is incredibly complex. And to be honest, I've had a very rapid but quite interesting learning curve over the past year or two. So, as well as being involved in NICE, I've been involved with the National Prostate Cancer Audit, and we're beginning there with support of members of Tackle members. We're now setting up a patient forum, working with the National Prostate Cancer Audit. Obviously, PSA screening's high on Tackle's agenda, and I take part in that. And as Ken alluded to, along with John Coleman, I act as an interface between Tackle and the pharmaceutical industry. And I've maintained and tried to increase our collaboration with Prostate Cancer UK. We are not in competition with Prostate Cancer UK. We are symbiotic. And yes, there are things we don't agree on, but there are many things that we do agree on. And the voice of the patient is, if it can be united, that's what we should be aiming for. So my major involvement on behalf of Tackle can most logically be described in 3 clinical areas. That's the newly diagnosed metastatic hormone-sensitive prostate cancers. That's advanced metastatic prostate cancer. And there's this very difficult group called non-metastatic high-risk hormone-resistant prostate cancer. Of the newly diagnosed, I think one of the horrifying figures that comes from the prostate cancer audit is that 17% of men will already have their cancer spread at the initial time of their diagnosis. That's a horrific figure. Now, current optimal therapy is a combination of androgen deprivation, hormone therapy, and chemotherapy. But there are many men who are not able to have chemotherapy because of their age, general condition, frailty, coexisting medical conditions, and there is no currently widely approved drug as an alternative to docetaxel. Abiraterone has partial approval. It's on an ongoing appeal. When I say partial approval, it wasn't approved at all, really. But there is an appeal process going through. That's a very complex issue. Like I was on a Zoom call for a day and a half last week to do that. But it was approved by the Scottish Medicines Commission in January 2020 for exactly the same purpose as is currently being refused in England. Enzalutamide is not approved by the SMC for this, but we had an appraisal with NICE in May this year, and we have yet to hear a decision on that. And to be honest, I don't think we're going to get a decision until this abiraterone decision is sorted out. COVID has done something good for patients. For patients with newly diagnosed metastatic disease, because it's not considered safe necessarily to have chemotherapy, these patients now have special funding arrangements with NHS England so that they can have either enzalutamide as a first choice, or if they can't have enzalutamide, abiraterone. That's only for the duration of the COVID crisis, but once started on that, these patients will be able to continue it. Advanced disease, as you know, patients have already had radical treatments, but their PSA is continuing to rise. The sort of things that's been happening, enzalutamide and abiraterone have for a long while been both fully funded by NHS England for this. But still, only one of those two can be used. They've got different modes of action, and certainly I've been asked by patients, why can't we use one if the other one doesn't work? And sadly, the evidence is that serial use of these drugs doesn't improve outcomes. So although you're only allowed to have one, probably having two is of no greater benefit. There's a new drug due for appraisal in January next year from Janssen. That's called apalutamide. It's another similar drug to enzalutamide, and we wait to see the result of that appraisal. This group is the one which I think is the most difficult for patients. These are the guys, non-metastatic, they're in a high-risk group, their hormone therapy has stopped working. So it's either called hormone resistant, hormone relapsed, castrate resistant, all sorts of different terminologies. But they've been through radical therapy, they've had surgery or radiotherapy or a combination of both. Then their PSA initially works, it goes down, then it begins to rise. They're very often put on hormone therapy without further investigation, one has to say. And then after a period of time, sadly, hormone therapy begins to become ineffective and the PSA rises again. But with these guys, with conventional scanning, we're talking here just conventional MRI and CT, no spread can be found. These guys are in a high-risk category. Their PSA is doubling in less than 10 months. Chemotherapy can be used off-label. Additional ADT can either be added or changed. Steroids anecdotally sometimes are added, but there is no currently approved treatment pathway. Of the drugs that we've got, abiraterone and enzalutamide, neither of those are approved in this situation by NICE or the SMC. Darolutamide is a newer drug produced by Bayer, again an androgen receptor blocker, and we're appraising that with NICE tomorrow morning. We shall be at this time be in deep discussion about it, and it's also going to be appraised by the SMC in November later this year. Janssen's drug apalutamide is going to be appraised for non-metastatic high-risk use, again, but not till January 2021. People do ask why our drugs refused approval. And it's a really complex issue that the process of appraisal is not easy, and it's very complex regarding the evidence sometimes submitted by the pharma companies, statistics, health economic data. Predicted increase in survival is often an arguable point, because very often the research data doesn't go as far as death and you use predictive curves. Drug costs, not surprisingly, it often boils down to economic modelling, predicting ongoing costs. Now, one of the things that it is not the responsibility of NICE to decide on costs. Those costs are predetermined with NHS England by the pharmaceutical company concerned. That's always kept confidential, because the drug list price that you may be able to get is not necessarily the price that NHS England will pay for it. So it's a bit confusing. There's another couple of treatments. Olaparib is about to be appraised for prostate cancer, very specifically in men with genetic abnormalities, mainly the BRCA1 and 2 genes. And there's obviously, many people know about space OAR, this gel which is inserted between the rectum and the prostate to reduce side effects of external beam or brachytherapy radiation. It's not yet fully funded by NHS. They originally got permission for 400 insertions, and now the great news is that NHS England has now released extra funding for a further 1,400 men to have it. So this is good news. Hopefully it will get full funding for everybody. Certainly, we're trying now to raise awareness of this. And if any chap who's listening has had experience of space OAR, perhaps they'd like to contact me, because we'd like to get some patient feedback. So in summary, if I was in a football team, I've helped to score 1 goal. We've got 2 matches currently in extra time, and we've got 4 fixtures yet to play this year. So things are moving on. Things won't stand still. It's been a busy year. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Ken. As you know, I'm a retired consultant urologist and clinical advisor to Tackle on screening and early diagnosis. So I'm hoping that through our speakers, I think we can cover much of the controversy surrounding prostate cancer screening. As you know, over the last 2 years, we've presented the growing statistics and case for screening for prostate cancer, now men's commonest cancer, with deaths exceeding 12,000 a year, which is now more than for breast cancer. I think everyone who heard last year's presentations will have had no doubt that we already have the tools available to provide efficient screening, with the benefits of benefits easily outweighing the harms of overdiagnosis and overtreatment. What is lacking, in my opinion, is an appreciation of this by the powers that be, principally the National Screening Committee. To update you, the National Screening Committee has issued a draft report to stakeholders, such as Tackle, for consultation. In a document over 300 pages long, it continues to claim, as in 2015, that there is insufficient proof that screening with PSA saves lives and that the harms outweigh the benefits. This claim is based on their review of mainly 3 clinical trials of PSA screening. The first trial, the UK CAP study, doesn't really qualify as a screening program because it was only a single PSA estimation with so far 10 years follow-up, and 10 years follow-up is not now considered adequate follow-up to judge the success or not of a screening episode, and certainly not a single episode. The second trial, the United States PLCO study, is certainly considered, I think, by pretty much all urologists to be too badly flawed to be worthwhile, and from which we can't really draw any conclusions. The third, the European study, is, in my view, insufficiently quoted because its best elements, as presented last year by Monique Rubol, show up to 50% reductions in the prostate cancer death rate. She clearly expounded the methodology used to achieve this, which the NSC has virtually ignored, at least the report, which incidentally was done by a medical agency, and I don't think there was any clinical input into the report at all. Well, we, that is CHAPS, Tackle, Orchid, Picasso, the Graham Fulford charity, and a growing list of charities are submitting a joint response pointing out all the flaws in the NSC report, divorced as it is from the reality of UK clinical practice. Now, against this background, our 3 speakers hopefully will address the 3 practical issues that arise from this controversy. Firstly, Professor Hashim Ahmed from Imperial College will present his work on rapid MRI screening. If PSA is inadequate, is a prostagram, equivalent to a mammogram, going to be the answer? Secondly, if we do continue with PSA screening on a large scale, can we automate the process to handle very large numbers of cases? And our second speaker, Matt Brine of Empresa Software and IT Consultancy, will explain how this is being achieved for Graham Fulford and the other screening charities such as CHAPS and Picasso, which contribute to this exercise. Finally, regarding point of care testing, at the other end of the spectrum, so to speak, Dr. John Bolodeoku will present the i-Chroma on-site PSA testing system, which I think could possibly be installed in every GP surgery and pharmacy in the country to bring PSA testing directly to men on a local basis. So I trust these alternatives will provide us with an interesting Q&A session at the end after the 3 speakers. And so without further ado, I would like to hand over to Professor Ahmed at Imperial College.
And thank you to Tackle and the committee for giving me this opportunity. I think you can see my PowerPoint screen now. So I'm a urologist. I do I spend half of my time in clinical work and half of my time doing research, and predominantly clinical trials. So I'm going to talk about Prostagram, which is the concept that can we screen for prostate cancer using a short MRI scan, very similar to breast cancer's mammogram. And some people in the US call this a manogram. We've decided to call it a prostagram because a manogram is trademarked. And this work has been supported by a number of charities and academic health funders. There's a big team behind this, and I always start by acknowledging this team who have been absolutely fantastic in delivering this trial and others. So the background to this work is, just as Chris said, that the UK National Screening Committee, this was in their previous recommendation, but I don't think it's particularly changed, is that they feel PSA is a poor test for prostate cancer and a more specific and more sensitive test is needed. So something that will find more of those important cancers that need to be treated, and something that will reduce the number of men going on to have biopsies, because they also feel the biopsy burden is too high. And I do agree that their latest iteration has ignored some of the key changes that have occurred in secondary care around how we've reduced the number of men having biopsies through use of MRI scans in secondary care. So this is the issue. This is a complicated diagram, but you can see each individual dot is a patient and their PSA levels and the Gleason score group along the bottom. And using a threshold of 3 for PSA, you do miss some clinically important cancers, the Gleason 7s, some 8s, and a few Gleason 9s. And a lot of men have Gleason 6 cancers, low-risk cancers, and below when their PSA is normal. And we don't want to find those men. Finding those men, yes, we can do active surveillance, but that carries its own burden. And even in the UK, we are over-treating a lot of men with low-risk disease. So PSA in this way has a sensitivity, so its ability to find the clinically important cancers is about 60% sensitive. The specificity, in other words, how specific is it to cancer, and the proportion of men that go on to have false positive results is better, but it's still not absolutely great. When you have an elevated PSA, this is what the pathway used to be like up until about 2017 in the UK. A man would have an elevated PSA and have a transrectal biopsy. You would see the prostate, but you wouldn't necessarily see the cancer, the tumor, if it was present. And most men would end up having a biopsy. Now, this meant that the biopsy test itself was fairly random. And PSA could be a really good test, but because we're using a biopsy method that's inaccurate, that's fairly random, I think PSA has been let down by the second part of this diagnostic pathway. So when you do these random tests, you find unimportant cancers that don't need to be treated. You miss important cancers because you don't know where they are. And you sometimes get a glancing blow on an important cancer and say it's not that important, and those men are incorrectly put on active surveillance. So I think the big culprit in the pathway is not PSA, but actually truss biopsy. And as a result of research led by the UK, this is one study called the PROMISE study, which you may have heard about. We have shown that in hospitals, when men are referred with a high PSA, we can use an MRI scan to define who should have a biopsy first. So here you can see that an MRI scan in hospital is much more sensitive for clinically important prostate cancer than a TRUS biopsy. And about a third of men can avoid a biopsy because their MRI is negative, and we can be fairly confident that there's not much there if the MRI is clear. And we find more important cancers and find fewer unimportant cancers, and therefore reduce the overtreatment burden that the National Screening Committee has a real problem with. So they're concerned about those men who are having unnecessary biopsy, unnecessary treatment. And population that we have around men who've been referred by their GP with an elevated PSA, it's now reached about 4,000 cases actually. And they all undergo an MRI first, and 40%, 41% to be accurate, have avoided an immediate biopsy. This in a previous setting would have been very close to 0% avoiding any biopsy. The time to getting a diagnosis has sped up because we can do an MRI quickly. We don't have to wait for a biopsy. And the number of men suffering an infection with their biopsy, because we do a different type of biopsy, this is a different talk really, we do a biopsy called transperineal biopsy through the skin, not through the back passage. The number of men suffering high-risk sepsis has plummeted from about 2 to 3% in London with a transrectal biopsy to 0.1%. So in this context, what we wanted to do is see whether a short MRI scan within the community, in addition or instead of a PSA test, could be a feasible way of finding important prostate cancer. So could a fast MRI or an ultrasound, and we have looked at ultrasound as well, be used as an alternative? And this was a very early study, the Prostagram 1 study, where we recruited men to have a PSA blood test and an ultrasound and a fast MRI. And these were men in the community, most of them asymptomatic, so a screening study. This is the short MRI. It takes about 15 minutes. So you could say, well, it's not that short, but there are some protocols that are down to about 10 minutes. The shorter you can get it down to, the more men you can scan and the more economically viable the paradigm becomes. And this is a man who would not normally have been referred because his PSA is 2.1. His MRI, this is his prostate. I don't know whether you can see my cursor, but this is the tumor here, which is slightly dark. On this type of scan, it appears bright, and on this type of scan, it appears dark again. And we don't use contrast, so we don't give an injection of dye, and there's no insertion of any back passage probes or anything with this particular scan. So this is a man who was found to have significant prostate cancer that probably would have progressed if we had waited for the PSA to hit 3 or 4, and for the GP to then make the referral. So we, in run up to the study, we all had our prostates scanned to optimize the sequences and to get them right. And during our Christmas quiz last year, we tried to pick out which prostate belonged to which doctor. A bit of fun. So Prostagram involved a paired screen design. It meant that every man had everything, so we could compare the different types of tests to each other. So men would have a PSA test and an MRI and an ultrasound, and if any one of those were positive, they would go on to have a biopsy. That was the only way we could be sure that we were comparing the tests fairly. And we recruited from GP practices, and men had an MRI scan at Mount Vernon, Paul Strickland Centre, as well as Imperial. It was a pilot study, so we restricted it to a couple of centres in London. And the radiologist didn't know what the PSA test was, and those reporting the ultrasound didn't know what the other test results showed either. So they were blinded so that the other tests couldn't influence what they said about their own test. And that's quite important in a study design to show validity. And then they all underwent a transperineal biopsy, and if there was a suspicious area, they would have that targeted as well. And transperineal, so through the skin, not through the back passage. We had no men with sepsis in this case. So this is the timeline. Studies take a long time to set up. So we originally got funding in about 2016, 2017. We wrote a paper on what we felt the study should be like, and then finally got approval in 2018 and started recruiting later that year and early 2019. We've finished the study and I'll show you the results. They've been presented at ASCO. We recruited very, very quickly. As you can imagine, this was a study that was very popular with men in the community. It didn't take us long. In fact, we had to close the doors after a while, especially after Stephen Fry tweeted about the study. And we're just quite close to getting the study published in one of the top journals. And we're now planning for the next phase. And I'll speak about that. We designed a poster to recruit men from GP practices and pubs and anywhere else we were allowed to put this poster up. And we used the term health check rather than talking about cancer, because our lead up and our patient representative said that was the best way of approaching men. And we also used an online recruitment and email so that men could approach us in any way they felt comfortable. This was what our recruitment curve was going to be according to our predictions. This is what our recruitment ended up being like. So we recruited about 9 to 12 months ahead of time. So recruited very, very quickly. And we're very grateful to all of the men who participated in the study, some of whom who really benefited because we found their cancers early. However, when you look at the invitations, we sent out over 2,000 invitations and about 400 eventually accepted. So this is pretty good odds. This is the sort of acceptance rate CAP saw in the UK and other screening studies have shown. So not all men will want to be screened. And then those are the results you see below. What we found is that depending on how you defined a positive MRI scan, so you can report an MRI scan on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 and 2 being normal, 3 you're not quite sure, 4 and 5 being, you know, the scan looks very abnormal. And if you define an MRI scan as 4 or 5, then the same proportion of men would be referred for a biopsy as a PSA of 3. However, if you included the score of 3, you would end up biopsying more men. So we think the optimal threshold for an MRI scan should be 4 and 5. Sorry. And what we found was that an MRI scan found more clinically important prostate cancers, whether you used a threshold of 4 or 3 to define how significant it was, without increasing the number of men with unimportant cancers being diagnosed. I won't show you the results here, but what we also found, and in a subsequent paper we'll present it, is that if you use a combination of PSA and MRI, you retain the benefits of finding more important cancers, but actually reduce the number of men being biopsied. So you get a win-win situation. So in future, we think it'll be a PSA threshold of 1. Everybody will get an MRI scan. And if an MRI scan is positive, then you'll get referred on for a biopsy. So we think that will be the pathway that will need to be tested in a much bigger study. A complicated table, but again, sensitivity and specificity are the sort of accuracy metrics that we use to compare tests. And as you can see, PSA has a sensitivity in our Prostagram study of 41%. So it misses a lot of important cancers. MRI score of 4 or 5 finds 20%, is 20% more sensitive. Although if you use the threshold of 3 for an MRI scan, you find a lot more cancers, but you do end up biopsying a lot of men. So there is a trade-off between lots of biopsies and finding important cancers. And in any screening strategy, you're going to have to accept that trade-off because you end up either harming too much or missing too much. So in summary, a short MRI increased the detection of clinically important prostate cancer. It had a similar overdiagnosis rate for unimportant cancer and a biopsy rate using MRI score of 4 or 5, similar to a PSA of 3 or greater. And in future, we think it will be a PSA of 1, have an MRI. If the MRI is suspicious, then have a biopsy. So you stage it and you funnel men through various tests rather than think that one test is going to be the be all and end all. So the implications of our research are that in future, an MRI score of 4 or 5 should be used as the optimal threshold and a PSA of 1. A large scale evaluation now of the clinical and cost effectiveness of using a short MRI in the community, not in a hospital, in the community, will need to be delivered. And what we might find in this study is that we don't need to repeat the PSA every 2 or 3 years. We could do an MRI scan every 5 years. And so the threshold, the interval between screening is also lengthened. And certainly that's what a lot of the colon cancer, rectal cancer studies and lung cancer studies are starting to find. And just to end, and this is a slight pitch, so I apologize unashamedly for the pitch, is that we are now in the fundraising phase for Prostagram 2, because nobody's going to change practice based on a 400 patient study. We will need to do a 20 or even 30,000 patient study, and that will probably cost in the range of about 2 or 3 million. Actually, 2 or 3 million is a small drop in the ocean for the amount of research funding that goes into prostate cancer and breast cancer and lung cancer. And this could change the lives of hundreds of thousands of men in the UK and beyond. So I think we'll get there. Some supportive philanthropic donations would be great, and we are working on that. If you have any links, please do get in touch. Thank you very much.
Okay, my name is Matthew Brine. I'm Managing Director of a company called Empresa, and last year I got introduced to Graham Fulford to see if we could help change the way that they run and organise prostate cancer testing events for themselves and various other charities across the country. My company develops bespoke solutions, so whether it's system, apps or websites. So for us, it wasn't that we had a specialism in this field. It was more that hopefully we could come up with something that would exactly fit what they needed. Okay, so we launched the service in January 2020, so working very much in partnership with the team at Graham Fulford. And just want to talk to you about some of the facilities that the system offers you. So the ability for people to register online, manage and set up events throughout the country for various charities, go and do online bookings for those events. Recently introduced is home testing kits. Obviously with COVID, we had a situation where lots and lots of events got cancelled. So what could we do to kind of offer another method for that? Online payments, so some charities will cover the costs, but some will ask for donations or will need to cover full costs depending upon their own individual funding. And we also brought across the GFCT database, which I'll talk about in a minute, but they've been collecting data since 2004 from all the charity events that have been running. So we brought all of that together so that if you are logged onto the new system, you could also see any results that you had right back to 2004. And I'll touch upon what we call white labeling, which really is charities to have this exact system, but to make it look like their own, represent their own brand. So if you're a visitor to the site, the first thing to do is we kind of need to get you to register and log on. All we need is you to provide an email address, your name and a password, just to kind of get you going on the system. Behind the scenes, we allocate you a unique user ID, and that will be associated with everything that you do from then onwards. We don't need any data until we do a booking of an event or ordering a home testing kit. And we're also, the system proactively tries to map you to 144,000 results that are in the database, so that if you've had tests over the years, then the system will bring those forward and allow you to see your complete history of any tests that you've ever done across all the charities. And we have an administration team at GFCT that we work closely with that run the whole system with us. Okay, so events. So this is where it all started out. It was all traditional events, and the idea was charities would run events all over the country. They would schedule them as far in advance as they would want, some dates and some timings for the events, understand how the events need to work in terms of the slots and how long it will take to take the test, how many people they need to help run the event, and where they need to take breaks if they're for periods of times. So the system can then allow people to start booking to a limit of those events. You can go online and find out more, so you can work out where the event is, if there's an event near you, so you can bring up a map, see where you are and see if there's somewhere nearby, and find out more information. And then you can go ahead, place your booking, and then depending upon how the charity wants to run the event, it can either be free, fixed price donations, or taken online through PayPal. Some charities like their events to be closed, so we didn't preclude them from the system, so they would give their members codes so that they're the only ones that are allowed to book onto the system. And it may well be once their members have booked, they may then open it to be a public event to fill the gaps, so it kind of is something that they can do. And then the good thing here is sometimes it's find an event near you. So I'm based out in Norwich. They don't run many events this way, but this kind of gives you an opportunity to bring up a map and say, you know, what's happening in the area. And I know there's a lot of powerful areas around the country where charities are running things, but there are some parts of the country where maybe these things aren't so easily available. And we have organisers across the events and the charities that therefore can go in and kind of manage what's happening to their event and see how things are going, how the bookings are going, whether they might need to extend it because it's become very popular, so they make an arrangement for the event to maybe extend it another hour to get more bookings in, but they can kind of proactively manage. Home testing kits came along when the COVID situation came. So the idea is a kit can be sent to you via the post, and you can take a blood sample and return it. An interesting, I went through a trial of this, and it took me quite some time to get enough blood out, but it was quite an interesting exercise to go through in terms of taking your own blood, packaging it. The turnaround is potentially between 2 and 5 days. So we have a dispatch from the lab midday every day, and it then collects them and sends them off. And then we're dependent on how long people will take to take the blood and return it. But it can be quite quick if people turn it around very quickly. So you order it online, and again, you make a decision on how you want that funded. So charities can set up discount codes for people to use. Or again, they can make a decision on how they want to that to be funded. Traditional events is very much paper-based in terms of what people do. They print out and they turn up to an event, but this time what we've got the use of codes, QR codes, barcodes, to allow people to turn up and officially register themselves when they turn up. And it also provides a mechanism for tear-off slips to be put with blood samples where necessary. So online we go through the consent process, so we provide all the material that people will read to understand the pros and cons of the whole process, and then the whole thing is consented online, so when you turn up you've already got a booking and you've made the necessary consent. When the results come through, people can either have an email or a text message sent through, but what we don't do is we don't actually send you the result electronically. We tell you it's ready to log on to the system. Traditional means was letter, so there is an element of that still happens where people don't have access to internet and maybe have asked, you know, friends and family or GFCT to register on their behalf. So when you place the booking, we send you a booking form, but some charities are actually running paperless events where they just say, turn up, all we need is your name, and when you turn up, they kind of will manage the process paperless. So these forms can be customized for charity and laboratory. So one of the pieces of work we're finding is different hospitals and different laboratories want the blood turning up in different ways. So whether it's a QR code or a barcode, or whether they want things that attach to the tubes or whether they don't want them attached. So there's lots of little options around how the forms are produced. Whether it's optionally printed and we put labels onto the tubes, and the fact that people can print it, put it on the fridge, and it reminds them of the event that's coming up to bring with them. Some events they've actually had equipment online, so sorry, at the site, so people turn up at the event and everything can be registered there and then. So they've got the laptops and the printers, and we've been to a number of events where we've helped with the pilot of these, and it's proven very successful where people can just turn up if they're not able to do the process themselves. We also send out emails and text messages, usual story that you get with doctors and dentists and things, in terms of just reminding you that your test is coming up. So in terms of the testing process, when you turn up to an event, we've developed an app that the organisers can use, and when you walk through the door, they just scan with the QR code with the app, and then they just turn up. Or they can search for somebody's name and mark them off on a register. We've also got the ability, as I say, to accept walk-ins as part of the process and register them online there and then. We can also track attendances this way. So some of the historical problems are you have 80 people turning up to an event. What you suddenly find is you've only got 75 blood results have come back. And sometimes it's just trying to work out whether that's because the people didn't actually turn up, or is it because something's gone astray in the process. So it gives us that better degree of confidence now that we can measure how many people are turning up and making sure that we're reconciling every result that's come back and nothing's missing. Talk about blood samples and the QR codes and the tear-off slips. It very depends upon what the laboratories want. It has improved the quality of the matching process. So before, this was all paper, handwritten, and when the results came back from the lab, there's lots of manual processing trying to work out spellings and date of births, handwritten back to the system. So this now improves vastly that entire process. And as I say, we've got home testing kits now, which can be used as an alternative to event testing. So in terms of the results, lots of things on here. One of the elements is improving and miskeying that goes on by using codes and using digital printed forms. We've had experience where an event has been run and the very next day the results have come in. So the blood went that evening from the event, and the next day all the results came in, so everybody was able to see their next day results. So there is potential this thing can be quite slick, the process. Hospitals also, some of them don't quite have all the technology that some of the laboratories have, so we have spreadsheets that come in, and the organisers can just upload the spreadsheets and the system will handle the process from there. We have the ability to store all of the data that's coming through into a central results database. And when we produce the result, there's a process of calculating what's terminology. There's a red, amber, and green letter, or a combination of. Sometimes there's an amber red or a green amber. Letter is the old terminology. We don't tend to send letters very often. Sometimes we do, but it's more of a report that comes up on the system and gives you information and lets you read more about it. And that's based upon the PSA score, the age, some of the medical questions you've answered, and also because we can pull through any tests you've done since 2004, we can see whether there's been any percentage variations, which is very, very powerful to be able to use that information. administrators can monitor the system, so they can basically see how all the events are going and whether the results are coming back. And one of the good things is, because we don't send the results, we make people go to the website, it enables us to see whether people have read the result, because they have to have logged on. And the team are often very proactive in terms of when a red score comes up, and if they haven't looked, then we've got the ability to make a call, make a decision on how quickly to chase them to make sure they're taking a look. And I know some of the charities have work with GFCT to kind of make sure that that notification is very prompt for some. 16 years of data in the system, so very, very powerful. And as I say, we talk about sending emails and text messages to let you know, and then we can then monitor. There's a concept of a letter that can be sent out if somebody does want a traditional method of communication, but the vast majority, thankfully, are now coming out through through email, rather than the thousands of pages that used to go out through paper historically. So very quickly, some of the charities that have come on board, and they use the same system, but it's their own look and feel, and it focuses on their events. So they take mypsatest.org.uk, and we come up with a domain name that represents them. They're all contributing to the database of 144,000 results as part of this process. The ability to share anonymous data and statistics for research. And one of the elements is also promoting testing. So as I say, people can come across my PSA tests and find an event that's running near them without really necessarily always knowing of the charity that might be near them. Ease of organising events and prostate and the home testing kit. So last slide really is just touching on statistics. So on the right hand side, we can see that since 2004, you can see the growth in terms of the number of tests and results that have been done. And up to 2019, the majority of this was done using kind of mail merge and printing and posting letters, and lots of people putting data into spreadsheets. So when we came along, we started it with a pilot in January. You can see the growth until the COVID situation. You can see we did 6,000 tests on the new system, and then we're gradually starting to reintroduce. Some events are starting to run again, but there's quite a bit more uptake on home testing kits going on. So we're currently at almost 150,000 results on the database. So we've got over 10,000 registered users on the new MyPSA test system. So they're people that have gone on and registered, may not have booked an event or a test just yet, but they've registered. We have organised 125 events across the country, but unfortunately 65 of them were cancelled. You can see 11,000 event bookings, but unfortunately 3,600 of them got cancelled. And we're currently over 2,000 home testing kits since it was launched just over a month ago as a new service. 92% in the database is green, 2.95 amber, 3.45 red. And sometimes the process doesn't quite work, whether blood samples are not blood samples, or whether something happens with the lab, or so we basically have an anomaly of 1.54%. So that's kind of it. As I say, we've helped GFCT and many other charities become move into the digital world. It's been a struggle for some people, without doubt, registering and adapting to a different process, but they are able to pick up the phone and get organisers of events or the administrators to do lots of the bookings for them. But as I say, we're now starting to look at growing home testing kits, and more events are starting to be planned, and people preparing for the future. And more charities are signing up for the white label, so that they can promote an event, and somebody goes to the website and they say, oh yeah, this is the charity that told me all about it. I think questions are going to be at the end, so I'll be around for those, but hopefully you found that useful.
Thank you very much, Matt. That's absolutely excellent. Thank you again, Matt. Excellent presentation, and certainly I think this is, in my eyes, potential precursor of a national system using PSA. So thank you. I think it's been excellent work. So, John, are you there?
Yes, I am. I believe Simon's going to put my slides up.
So Dr. John Bolodeoku will now do his presentation on point of care testing with the i-Chroma PSA test system. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you very much. Thanks for the organization giving me a chance to come and talk to you about the PSA method. I'm Dr. John Bolodeoku. I'm an independent pharmaceutical physician and also chemical pathologist with an interest basically in point of care testing and self-monitoring devices. And for my sins, I still practice as an honorary consultant in Basingstoke Hospital, where I see my patients in cardiology with lipid disorders. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about the i-Chroma PSA method. This is a method I've been working with the company Bodytech in Korea for almost about 10 years. They've got a whole lot of other methods, assay methods, but this is their PSA method. Next slide, please. Next slide, Simon, please. Fantastic. Now, the presentation here, I'm hoping to present data from basically about 3 studies. One where we evaluated and validated the i-Chroma testing method in one of the London hospitals. Second one, we looked at the PSA method using external quality assessments with other methods. And then the third one, a real live testing of the point of care screening in the community in Worthing. Next slide, please. Yes, that slide. So I'd like you, this is a nice pictorial here, but I'd like you to focus on the middle column under the test procedure, or the first column to the left. What you see is, if you look at number 1, we go straight to number 1, which is draw whole blood. You can see what it uses is 35 microliters of blood in a little capillary tube. You go down to section 2 and dip that straight into the detection buffer. Move to 3. Give it shake it about 10 times, get back in and take 75 microliters off that and put it onto the cartridge and wait for 15 minutes. That's all you do. And then you stick it into the device reader, which is basically the size of a shoebox. And after 15 minutes, it gives you a result immediately. Good. That's the method. Next slide, please. So the first study I'll present is this one, which was actually done in the Royal London, where we gave them the device and the kit to run. Next slide. And if I just basically summarize 3 points, they kind of one of the 3 of their measures they looked at. The first one is they correlated basically the i-Chroma PSA method with the method they had, which was the Roche E602 total PSA. And you can see it gave a correlation of 0.9664. Obviously, you want it to be 1.0, but there are very few methods that get it to 1.0, except it's the exact same method. But this is extreme, very good correlation with the laboratory-based method. You can see further on that might have been a slight positive bias, and we'll see some of that showing on later on in the study. Another important thing they looked at, if you use the third point, is the incubation period. As you can see, the normal incubation period is about 15 minutes, but what they did is they looked at it between 10 and 20 minutes, because sometimes you tend to put 10 of the samples, and there's a kind of small 5-minute window between them. But you can see what they found out was that the results were consistent whether you looked at it at 10, 15, or 20 minutes. So that shows that this you can put it, and it can go past about the 15-minute incubation period up to 20 minutes, and you'd still get the same result. Next slide, please. Now, in this particular study here, what we looked at is obviously with every single method, you have to enroll in an external quality control program. What this does is also gives you an idea of how well your method is performing with the quality control. But furthermore, it also gives it a chance to look at how it's comparing with other methods in the country. So next slide. This slide immediately just gives you a nice example of the results we found, which was the i-Chroma and all the other methods that were used in the request method and the UK NEQUEST method. And you can see with all the methods there, basically there was a correlation of 0.9. with all the laboratory-based methods that were also involved in the external control method. I think apart from, if I believe there's one, which was the Roche Cobas, I believe, which is a 0.75. But all other methods, as you can see, were very good. And this goes on to confirm that the method correlates very well with some of the most of the traditional laboratory methods used in the UK. Next slide, please. Now, this is the study where we actually took the i-Chroma out to the community and actually took part in a screening test that was actually a screening session that was held in Worthing. Next slide, please. Now, effectively, what we did is we took 3 samples here. Can we go on to the next slide? What you found out is we had 143 volunteers. We took basically 3 samples. One went to the Worthing Hospital Laboratory where they used an Abbott PSA method. Another sample was sent to JB Consulting, which is my lab, where we ran the i-Chroma PSA. And in 55 of the patients, we actually took their finger prick samples there and we performed it there at the screening center. So 55 of the volunteers, we were able to have the results there and then. And all the others, we actually basically sent it to a lab in Worthing and to my lab where we actually run the i-Chroma. Next slide. Obviously, you've heard about the red and amber green analysis. That's what we had to use, and therefore groups of patients according to the green, amber, and red analysis. Next slide. Now, this shows you, first of all, the 143. This was the venous samples done with the Abbott Architect method in Worthing and the lab where we looked at the PSA i-Chroma, and you can see great correlation of 0.98 between the samples. Next slide. Now, this also gives you an idea if you look at the RAG analysis and see also what you get there. And this is breaking them down into green, amber, and red. And what you can see here is reasonably very good, would I say, correlation, even with using the green, amber, and red. Obviously, they're slightly a little bit more on the amber compared to the red. But again, going back to remember that the i-Chroma method has a slight positive bias. So we were not too surprised in seeing that. And that's just a matter that we just needed to work on the reference range. But that was still very good looking at the actual absolute values for now. Next slide. This slide here, if you can read it, is actually now looking at the actual raw data of the 55 volunteers who had a capillary method also done. And if you look at the column, you would see there's the capillary method, there's the venous method, which was actually done in the labs on the i-Chroma, and the lab result you see is the Worthing Hospital Abbott laboratory method. And you can see that actually they are not bad at all. Obviously, when you look at subjects 43, 47, and 55, these were some of the things, the questions to answers we asked them. So obviously 43, there was some vigorous exercise. 47 had ejaculated the night before, and 55 also had ejaculated the night before. Now, it's interesting when you look at 55 that only the capillary method had a slight increase, and that patient had ejaculated the night before, but it didn't show up on the venous or the laboratory method. But what we kind of loved about this is that the reds are consistent in both the capillary sample, the venous sample, and the laboratory results. Next slide. This now was actually using the 55 subjects that had their capillary blood samples done, comparing this with the Abbott Worthing laboratory method. And you can actually see again a very good correlation of 0.9. Next slide. Now, when you break it down into the RAG analysis, this is now the 55 subjects. You can also see that again, it's the amber again, where you just see a slight increase, only this time 2 subjects compared to the Abbott Architect method, the serum, but the reds are still very consistent. Now, this again, as I said, the amber is possibly because of the positive bias that you also see on the i-Chroma, but this is, for us, this was fantastic, especially bearing in mind that these results you were getting 15 minutes into after taking that test. Next slide. I think with that quick whistle-stop tour, I've tried to show to you and keep you interested that the i-Chroma PSA method showed very good correlation with many of the laboratory methods it's been compared against, also in a real-life setting. Though it tends to have a positive bias at a higher PSA values, but we believe if you adjust the reference range, this will actually make it right on spec. And bearing in mind that what you have here is a point-of-care device. The reader is just a shoebox sized. It's just the size of a shoebox, and the cartridge, and that's all you need. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. I think that's a most interesting presentation, and I think we will be able to look at its application when the questions come up. Thank you.
Alan Taylor, Chairman Isle of Wight Prostate Cancer Support Group. We run PSA events on the island, at least a couple each year. And initially we did it the old-fashioned way, all handwritten, but via Picasso, we were introduced to a more computerized method, and then on to Impresa as well. The problem we've had using the Impresa method is that if we need to change anything that has been set up for the event itself, for instance, the one we're trying to run one in 2 weeks' time, and we've had to reduce the numbers because of social distancing, etc. And we've also had to change the venue, and we have to cancel the event and then reintroduce it again. And this has caused so much confusion rather than just change the event itself, just to make a few modifications to the event itself. The question is Impresa still working on improving their setup so that you can actually manipulate more the booking system?
Yes, we're obviously constantly getting feedback on a number of things. I think the challenge we have with the event side is just sometimes the nature of how the slots change, and therefore there's a danger that people won't realize or read the emails if we resend or automate the changing process. But yes, we've just obviously recently launched the home testing kit, where all of our focus changed for the events. But yeah, we're working with GFCT to collate all of the feedback and to look at it. And in terms of the administration at the moment, it's all administered by GFCT just so we can make sure the whole process is working. And in longer term, we can look at how organisers can kind of do more administration themselves. But it is very much a learning exercise. We've learned a lot since the whole system went live in January, and the reality of a lot of how the events are then run differently to maybe how we assume some of it. So yeah, keep sending the feedback through. It's definitely an evolution of a solution. So.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Nigel Allen. This is a question to John. How does John plan to get this method into GP surgeries?
Well, yes. I mean, I think we've got a few people actually out there talking to a few GP surgeries, letting them know about the devices. Obviously, it's very interesting talking to the GP surgeries, because when you go to them, to believe it or not, the first thing that each GP surgery says is, where is the cost savings I'm making to any device or anything you want to bring into their system? They immediately go, where is the cost saving? And it's almost like you then have to go into the system and say, okay, you start going against the NHS and trying to look at their costs and how much. And then half of them don't even know how much they pay for PSA tests to the NHS, because it's all bundled. So it's very interesting when you go to a CCG with a new device, the first thing they say is, how does it become cost effective? However, when you look at the pharmacies, which is where I do agree, that's where I have had some traction of where pharmacies see that, oh, this could be a nice little device to have in the pharmacy or a well-manned clinic where we can then have people come and do the PSAs. So the answer to your question, GPs are still a little bit stuck in what's the cost effectiveness, whilst the pharmacies, I would say, I find them a little bit more welcoming to point of care devices. But I am out there talking to them.
Can I come in here with a comment?
Yes, carry on.
Well, Ken, myself, and an expert GP, Anne Williams, went to the Royal College of GPs last year to talk to them about PSA and educating GPs and so on, and the Royal College were not the slightest bit interested at all. It was really most disconcerting and disappointing. So I think you're probably right. I think that pharmacies are much more likely to have an open mind on this, whereas GPs, I think you are kicking against the pricks.
Yeah.
Okay. We've also got a question from Michael Budd. Is DRE now not recommended following a high PSA? Over to the panel.
Well, shall I comment on that clinically?
Go on.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got a high PSA, you need to have a DRE done. But DRE is a very inaccurate way of picking up prostate cancer. Early prostate cancers, stage 1, stage 2, frequently the prostate feels entirely normal. Yeah, a DRE is relevant. Occasionally you pick up an abnormal prostate with a normal PSA. That's rare in my opinion, in my fine, experience. But yeah, DRE is relevant still.
Okay, thank you, Chris. A question from Ian Yearwood. It says, hi, David. From my experience, stress in general increases my PSA. I have proven this to myself on a number of occasions. I don't know.
Not sure that's a question, really.
No, that's what I was wondering, but it's in the Q&A, so I thought I'd just...
There is, Roy Sarsby has got his hand up, so we'll allow him to talk. Roy, you're on. Oh, hang on, unmute.
Hello, sorry, is that better? Beg your pardon.
Sorry, Roy, you're now live. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon. Roy Sarsby, trustee of Cancer Testing South. We do prostate cancer testings in Surrey and Sussex area. The old chestnut, everything we've looked at this morning refers from 50 onwards. We prefer to work from 40, some areas 45. Prostate Cancer UK, prostate support, I think, use 45, but we like to go from 40. Any comments about why we shouldn't be doing that, please?
Can I come in there?
Please, Chris.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. The international guidelines are all recommending that men aged 45 who are considered to be at high risk, in other words, those with a family history, and Black, African or Caribbean ethnicity or mixed race should be getting a PSA score on the board at the age of 45. But I think that it is logical to lower it to 40. The youngest man that we have picked up in the last few years with prostate cancer, a clinically significant one, was 44, and we know that a few percent of men do present with prostate cancer in their 40s. So yeah, also an advantage of so-called getting a score on the board is that we can use the PSA in these relatively young men as an indicator of risk. So if you're in your 40s and your PSA is above 1, then automatically you would consider that to be a risk factor, and you should be therefore screened with PSA more often, probably too early. If you're in your 50s and your PSA is above 2, then the same applies. So I would certainly say that PSA testing should start from 40 onwards.
Thank you very much, Chris. That's very reassuring. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Roy. Any more?
Nobody's
Steve's
got
got
any
his hand up. Steve's got his hand up.
Yeah, can I make a couple of comments? Firstly, to John, if we start putting these into pharmacies, one of our criticisms will undoubtedly be, like many people criticise on testing events, that the men aren't being properly counselled beforehand and that sort of thing. And also, who gives the result to the patient? Basically, my local pharmacy, yeah, could probably put a machine in, but I wouldn't trust the pharmacist there to tell the result to somebody because of all the questions that would then come as a result of that test. Now, arguably, that is a little bit the same for cholesterol and for glucose, but where we are being we're being pilloried by GPs sometimes because we are possibly not counselling patients, whatever it happens to be. How do you think we should handle that?
Yeah, I would say, it's actually the same old chestnut we had when, as you said, with cholesterol. It's the same thing, and I think the way you can get around that really is have, well, somebody who's there first of all to approve the results. So almost like the lab, which we would have normally, where you would have somebody who authorizes the results and probably talks to somebody on the other side about the results. And now that things are digital and vocal, and virtual, there's nothing that stops the pharmacy from having what I would call a resident pathologist or laboratory technician who can approve the results and actually then give it out and then advise the person on the other side what to do. And if it means, like what we did with cholesterol, you've got a high cholesterol, you need to see somebody. You've got a high PSA, you need to see your urologist, or you need to see your GP. And I think that would be the way forward, is that you have somebody who's in that gap who basically translates the result to the patient or to the volunteer or to the individual who's asked for the test. And that could be referring them to a specialist. But that's what the organizations would want you to have, is someone who basically can say, I validate the result, it's accurate and it's correct, and actually this is what you should do now that you've seen that.
Well, I think that you would probably just need to go back to the sort of system that we were using when everything was paper-based, and you have this consenting information, and on the back you would have all of the relevant questions that people would go through. So I would see that as a simple solution to that problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Steve, did you have another question?
Again, perhaps just a question to Professor Ahmed. It's going to be brilliant to do so many MRIs, but what the argument will be is who's going to read them all and how you're going to get it done. Is there any computer-aided software involved in this?
There's quite a lot being developed, so I agree. I mean, one of the challenges will be investment in MRI scanners, but we did that for mammography, and we invested in radiologists. We've invested in non-clinical people looking at mammograms now. But the AI technology solutions that are coming through are looking pretty spectacular. So I think we'll be able to overcome that over the next 5 years.
Ash, can you give us an indication of cost?
So an MRI scan currently in the NHS, it's all a bit odd the way it's costed, is anywhere between 120 and 160 pounds for a multi-parametric 30 to 40 minute scan. A short MRI scan is going to be below 100, but it's all scale. So if you're doing a lot, it'll probably plummet to much less than 100. So it's more expensive than a PSA test, but if you can funnel men to have a PSA first and then an MRI scan in the community, I think you start to see the economies of scale. But it's something that we need to investigate further. If we don't start now, we'll never get there. It doesn't change the arguments around PSA testing, it just advances the field further.
And does the current sort of standard 1.5 Tesla machine give you as good a result as a 3 Tesla, or do people have to invest in upmarket 3 Tesla machines?
No, the 1.5 Tesla. So this is the resolution of the scanners, and most NHS hospitals have 1.5 Teslas, and this is what they're using in secondary care in men who have an elevated PSA already. So 1.5 Tesla machines can more than cope, and the scanners that go around with scanning men for lung cancer, these mobile units, the same principle could easily be used for prostograms.
Chris, there's a question.
I was interested. Sorry, go on.
So there's a question from Martin Budd. This is a question for Matt, which is about, but actually perhaps having Professor Ahmed having just asked that question about cost, perhaps this question is also about cost for Empresa. What is the cost for PSA tests? And we should ask John the same. What's the cost for one of his tests as well? So we hear from everybody.
Okay, so do you want me to go first? So I mean, what you get is the reader, the reader, which is just basically what you buy, which is the size of a shoebox. That's roughly about £2,500, and that's for the basic reader. The test cartridge, which is what basically you're looking at the price of the test, you probably get it somewhere between, I would say, about £6 a test.
Right.
And that's all you need to invest in, apart from the pipette tips and that might need. But that's the major expenditure. And
so, Matt, have you?
It varies between about £20 to £25, depending upon the home test kits or the event tests. But as I said, sometimes the charities are absorbing all of that cost, or they're part funding it. So it's really just depends on kind of the arrangement that GFCT and the labs and the charities have got together. So there are a number of labs that are servicing it, and therefore their costs are slightly different. So.
The cheapest, as far as I can see, the cheapest PSA test that you can buy online seem to be coming in at about £70. So I think what the charities are charging at the moment are, in the region of £20 to £25 is very reasonable. It's questionable whether it's sustainable going forwards, but just to comment on cost.
There's just one other question that's here, which is a general question, which is: should doctors be looking for a correlation between COVID and prostate cancer in black and mixed race men, given the recent publicity?
Maybe I can. I guess it depends on what Paul is referring to in terms of correlation. So is there a correlation between developing prostate cancer and COVID? I don't think so. Is there a correlation between having COVID and poorer outcomes? There's the indirect impact of COVID, which is delayed diagnosis and delayed treatment, particularly for men with advanced disease and metastatic disease, which could have an impact. I don't think having COVID necessarily makes the cancer worse or better in any way. But will anybody invest in looking at these questions? I'm sure people will look at the long-term outcomes of COVID on cancer, diagnosis and prognosis over time, but across all cancers, I don't think there will be many people interested in investing in looking at whether COVID sort of impacts directly on the cancer cells.
Thank you very much.
I've got a comment to add on that, if you like. It does raise a political question. My guess is that whatever we say about the NSC, we probably won't get prostate cancer screening with PSA. They'll probably knock it back, whatever we say. But last year, Lord Ribeiro and myself saw one of the junior ministers in the Department of Health, and we were pressing the inequality button. She was the Minister for Inequalities, and we said, there is no screening, and this is an inequality. And she took this on board. She promptly got reshuffled, so obviously nothing further happened. But I think that this is an angle that we can push. That the same groups who've been hit worse by COVID are the same groups that are being hit by prostate cancer.
Interesting.
Thank you, Chris.
Can I just say that John Coleman would like to ask a question?
Well, fine. Oh, yes, certainly.
John, you're on. Oh, no, you're not.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, John.
Yes, we can.
This is a question for John about the i-Chroma machines. If one of our groups was to buy one of the machines, you've given us the cost, how many of the pieces of cardboard or whatever we call it, do you have to buy at once? And the second question is, do people have to be trained to use the machine, and how long does that take?
So the first thing is the once you bought the machine, the boxes, the cartridges come in boxes of 25. So all you need, so the lowest number that you can order is 25, because that's in a box. So in a way, you don't like some of the kind of discrete analyzers where you buy a whole lot of reagents for 100 samples or 200 samples. All you would probably can purchase is a box of 25 tests. So that's the minimum that you would you can order. Back to the training, the i-Chroma, believe it or not, it's very simple. It's a touch screen. It has very little training. The people who worked in my lab that ran most of these tests were all students who were on the vacation jobs, and they were running in the lab for 6 months with me working with the machine. So it's something that in one day, in less than a day, you can be fully trained. It's really designed to be point of care, and as you can see, the pipetting is minimum. You only have 2 stages of pipetting, and that's it. And they're all in kind of basically predetermined pipettes.
Thank you, John.
Who would do the training if we wanted some training?
Well, my group would do the training for you.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear
my
that.
group, someone from my company would do the training. We would come and do the training. You might even have me come do the training.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you, John. Both John. We've gone over time. If there's any outstanding questions, you can send them in, and we'll get the answers to the panelists. From my point of view, I would like to thank Steve, Chris, Professor Ahmed, Martin, and John for their presentations, and thank everybody for joining the call. I hope you'll find it useful, and look forward to meeting you in person sometime in the future. So thank you to the people at the back office, Simon and and all the work, and I think it's been a successful debate. On that note, I think we'll close the meeting and thank the panelists.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ken. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.